Namaskar. Hello and welcome to 𝗏𝗽𝗏𝗀𝗏 channel. I'm your host Sree Iyer. A happy Makar Sankranti, Pongal, Lohri, and every region has its own version of this. So a happy Pongal to all of you. And today, my good friend from the United Kingdom, Kumar Bala, is joining us, and we're going to talk about Makar Sankranti and Pongal and why these things came into being, what is the purpose, and everything around it. Let's welcome Kumar Bala. Kumarji, namaskar and welcome to 𝗏𝗽𝗏𝗏 channel. How are you?
Namaskar, Vanakkam, Iniya Pongal Nalvalthukal and Shubh Makar Sankranti. Well, it's a day of significance for all Indians from north to south and east to west. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And viewers, Kumarji has put together a wonderful slide presentation. And with your permission, I'll start with the first one, and then you can tell me when to move, and I'll be happy to do so. So I'm just bringing it up now. Here we go.
Thanks, Sriji. So before we start the presentation, I want to sort of acknowledge people who've been of great influence in putting these things together, right? Like people like Dr. Meenakshi Jain, 𝗥𝗘𝗙𝗘𝗥𝗏 Sampath, and Sanjeev Sanyal, and a lot of others have, for the last 10 to 20 years, tried to bring forth our own indigenous perspective of our civilizational values and our history, right? So a lot of what is in the presentation is based around the sort of work that they've done in the past. Like as Newton said, standing on the shoulders of the giants, these are the giants I'm borrowing heavily from. So you will see a lot of these ideas have already been discussed by people like Sanjeev Sanyal and 𝗥𝗘𝗙𝗘𝗥𝗏 Sampath in detail. So, but I still think that as a civilization, as a nation, we still need to retell these stories during these touchstone or milestone events in a year so that we focus on what unites us. As a nation, we need to tell these stories so that we know what binds us together as a nation, right? So moving forward, then we'll have a strong foundation as a civilization in protecting our values and in discussing our values with other great civilizations, right? So that is the fundamental sort of idea behind this presentation. Sriji, next slide, please. So going back to the beginning of how our ancestors saw themselves as, they consider themselves as the people of the land of seven rivers, right? Like the 𝗟𝗏𝗡𝗏. In most of their view of who they are, they always went back to this idea of rivers being the lifeline and the rivers being sacred. And of course, the idea behind IVC, the Indus Valley Civilization, is again built around the idea of Indus being the source of the great civilization, right? And it's similar to most other great civilizations around the world, not just unique to us, but most great civilizations arose on the river banks. For example, in 𝗏𝗏𝗏 Purana, they talk about the seven major rivers of Bharat and invoke them in a way to say that these are our great rivers, and those are the rivers that keep us, that serve as our lifeline, right? 𝗥𝗘𝗙𝗘𝗥𝗏 𝗏𝗏𝗏 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 Saraswati Narmade Sindhu Kaveri Jalesmin Sannidhin Kuru. So a lot of us would have heard growing up these shlokas, and they fundamentally link us back to our civilization as IVC, or as we now call it as Sindhu Saraswati civilization, right? Both of those rivers being mentioned in this verse, and also all the great rivers of the river basins of India, starting all the way from Indus or Sindhu to Kaveri in the south. And most of us would know that our identity as a nation, India, comes from 𝗟𝗏 Sindhu becoming 𝗏𝗏 Hindu in Persian, and then it becomes Indica or Indorum when it reaches Greek or Athens or Rome, and hence we become India. Both our identity, national identity as India, and our religious identity as Hindus, both come from our link to 𝗟𝗏 Sindhu. Sindhu being the primary source for both of these names, right? Both Hindu and India down the line. Yeah, next slide, please. And our political identity, or what I would call as the socio-political identity of ours, comes again from the idea of the sacred geography of our motherland being defined as this grand landmass with the great ocean in the south and north of the great ocean and the south of the great mountains, right? Utram yat samudrasya himadaraschaiva dakshinam parsham tad bharatam nama bharati yatra santatihi. So Vishnu Purana defines our political identity or socio-political identity as the people of this great sacred land, or the land that lies to the north of the ocean, which is named after the nation, the Indian Ocean, and south of the snowy mountains, the Himalayas. It's called Bharatam, and there dwells the descendants of Bharata. Bharata being from the tribe, from the Battle of 10 Kings, who then collated the Rig Vedas, brought all the tribes of Bharat together from north to south and east to west again, creating this identity, the political identity as who we are as Bharat, right? So when the constitution says India, that is Bharat, linguistically, we are Bharat and we are calling it as India. That is why we say India, that is Bharat. Fundamentally, we are Bharat and India, that is Bharat. Semantically, that is why it's written that way. And we really can see why the nation's founders decided to use that term, India, that is Bharat, because this is how we see ourselves as the sacred geography, people who reside in this sacred geography. So extending this idea that luckily we have two great classical languages. There's no other country on earth that has two classical languages. If you take Europe as a civilization, West as a civilization, it has ancient Greek and Latin as two classical languages, but Greek being part of the modern state of Greece and Latin being associated more with Italy. India is the only country that has two classical languages that spawns over thousands of years, nearly 4,000 to 5,000 years, both with Sanskrit and Tamil in their written forms, right? So we are lucky to have two classical languages. And not only that gives us a sense of connection to our antiquity, but it also helps us figure out how our ancestors thought of themselves in different, in these two classical languages, right? Like, for example, one of the great shlokas from 𝗏𝗏 𝗏 goes something like, தேனமிழ் பொழில்கொளாலை விலை சென்னல் துன்னி வள செம்பொ நின்கும் நிகழ நான்முகன் ஆதியாய பிரமாபுரத்து மறைஞான ஞான முனிவன் தானொரு கோலும் நாளும் அடியாரை வந்து நழியாத வண்ண முறை செய் ஆனசொல் மாலையோதும் அடியார்கள் வானில் அரசாழ்வார் ஆணை நமதே. So the shloka roughly translates as, in this Brahmapuram of Brahma, the four-faced god, where honey-filled flowers bloom and crops of sugarcane and red rice are abundant, the sage whose knowledge comes from the Vedas sang these hymns. Those who recite these shall rule the heaven. By that they mean this Brahmapuram, our land of ours, the Bharat, and that is our mandate, right? So this is a great way how the southern traditions, the southern literary traditions, like the Sangam literature, which derives from the Vedas and the Puranas and the Upanishads, extends this idea of us as a people, us as a single civilization, and uses the same concepts that are found in the Vedas and the Puranas to legitimize the rulers of the land. So when a king like 𝗏𝗏𝗏 Cholan would give the throne to Rajendra Chola, this would be the shloka that would be recited, right? Shlokas like these, which derive from our historical ancestry, is what would justify or give the mandate to the subsequent king to rule the nation. Next slide, please, Sriji. Some of you might have noticed that this was exactly the shloka that was sang in two pinnacle moments in our recent history in the last 75 years. When the British occupation of India ended in 1947, the founders of the modern Republic of India decided that there should be a symbolic transfer of power that ties us to our ancestral civilizational roots, and hence they used the idea of a scepter, the 𝗟𝗏𝗏𝗏 or Sengol, which most Hindu monarchs would pass it on to their descendants as a source of transfer of power. So in 1947, in August 14th, 15th, 1947, the sannyasins from the south of India would give this scepter to Mountbatten and receive it, cleanse it with the holy waters from Tanjore, and give it to Pandit Nehru while 𝗏𝗏𝗏 Sambandhar's shloka was recited, that you shall rule this heaven, and this is our mandate, right? Like deriving our ancestral heritage from this idea of Brahmapuram and from the idea of the four Vedas being the foundational value system of our civilization, right? And the second time the shloka was recited was when Prime Minister Narendra Modi installed the Sengol in the new parliament, reflecting our return to greatness as a great grand old civilization, the last surviving civilization of the classical antiquities. It is important that we have a symbol that links us to our past, right? And the usual enemies of our nation who want to break us first made this claim that it did not happen. But then, luckily, we had an American newspaper and a preeminent American journalist writing about it vividly as he goes. One sannyasi carried a scepter of gold, 5 feet long, 2 inches thick. He sprinkled Nehru with the holy water from Tanjore, drew a streak in sacred ash across Nehru's forehead. Then he wrapped Nehru in the pitambaram and handed him the golden scepter. So then they said, well, it wasn't important. Well, if it wasn't important, why would the most preeminent magazine of the time and the preeminent journalist of his time, writing about the world's largest democracy, would put this as the key event of transfer of power? Even to Americans, this felt as the most important pinnacle event on that busy days of the 15th of. You can imagine the capital of Delhi being busy, but he decided to, he and Time Magazine decided to put that as the cornerstone of the transfer of power. Then they made the claim that, well, the British don't consider it important, which is which doesn't make sense. It's not up to the British to decide what is important to us or not. And what's Britain signed the Indian Act of Independence in 18th of July 1947, and to them that is all there is. As soon as the law was enacted, everything else to them is just procedural, right? So, and not only that, when I speak to my English and Scottish and Welsh and Northern Irish colleagues and friends and family about this particular pinnacle event, they are really amazed by these events. They both Britain has a great sense of irony and poetry and looking at things in a very symbolic way, right? That they are a grand civilization of their own. They have grand traditions, so they understand that this plays a vital role in nation building, right? So for lack of better words, Indians living in India to say, well, Britain doesn't take it seriously. No, it's not. You can go to the museums across Britain, from British Museum to Ashmolean and Oxford. You can see how much importance they serve, or the importance they show to the classical antiquities and the symbolic aspects of it, right? From ancient Greece to Persia to Rome to India to China, they value these symbolisms quite well. So the 3 points: it did not happen. No, it did happen, and we have written proof from 1947. Unless they want to claim that we all time traveled and somehow got time to write about it, and it was important. That is why even the Americans thought to put it in their preeminent magazines of that time. And Britain has a great sense of symbolism and grandeur, and of course they appreciate these sort of symbolic events. Shriji. So continuing on with the tradition of how both the North and South saw themselves as a single civilization, in the grand Sangam literary tradition, we have this idea of dividing the landmass into various 𝗤𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 theme around it, and there is a deity associated with that particular landscape. So a poem about love would normally be set in mountainous ranges, and it'll always linked to Kartikeya or Murugan in Tamil, right? And the same idea, Mullai will always be about patience and waiting, and it will always go to Thirumal or Vishnu in the sense of, in the both great epics of Ramayana and Mahabharata, the Vishnu, there's this idea of staying in the forest, patiently waiting to come back to rule the kingdoms, right? So the idea of patience is always associated with Vishnu in the Sangam literature. And of course, you have Marudam, where it is about the domestic life, the farmlands, and it's always associated with Indra because of Indra or Vendan, and Neidal being Kadalon in Tamil, and Varuna about separation and sorrow, because people, traders and people and fishermen would leave and into dangerous seas, and it usually used to show separations, right? And in Palai, it's about hardship, and it's about a journey, and it's always associated with Durga or Kali or Kotravai in Tamil. And next slide, Sriji. As you can see, there are some of these great Sangam poetic works. Thamarai malar padukkum Thirumal Vanavar Vanangum Mayun. For example, let's take one shloka there. There it clearly explains the Thirumal, Lord Vishnu, who rests on a lotus flower, is revered by the god. So a lot of these you can see in Sangam literature goes back to the Puranas and the Vedas and Upanishads, linking north and south and east and west always through our last 5,000 years of history. Excellent. So I would now like to sort of talk about some of the unique values of Hinduism and why it is important that we focus on these during these dharmic festivals, right? The dharmic harvest festival. But the first one I would like to talk about is we are the last great civilization that still reveres the divine in the female form. No other major faith on the planet still has female divinity as a major aspect of their faith system. That is why when our founders established our nation and when fought for its independence, they personified our sacred geography as Bharat Mata. In Vande Mataram, Bankim-Chandra Chattopadhyay personifies our great country as Bharat Mata, and he goes on to call, you are Durga, you are Saraswati, you are Lakshmi, you are the source of our knowledge and our on our arts and everything else that we create, right? So that unique sense of showing divinity in female form is unique to Hinduism. Another unique aspect of Hinduism is that we value every form of lifestyle, not just pastoral or agricultural or urban. Even tribal and hunter-gatherer lifestyles are celebrated as part of human flourishing, unlike other faiths which want to proselytize and convert and civilize, right? Civilize with double quotes in it, as something is out of civilization and somebody has to go and proselytize and convert and civilize, right? Which has never been part of the Hindu civilization. Tribal and hunter-gatherer lifestyles have always been part of our core civilizational ethos, and that's where lies the idea of dharmic acceptance, whereas Western tolerance. In the West, they talk a lot about tolerant, how tolerant we are, as if other ideas are some sort of a irritant and they had to be tolerated, right? Whereas we always look at it as acceptance. The dharmic ideals have always been about acceptance, right? And the other aspect, the unique aspect of our civilization is that nature and environmentalism plays a pivotal role in our in the way that we practice our faith. For example, all our great temples are associated with rivers and mountains and forests. You can see Rameshwaram over there. And of course, Kailash Manasarovar is another example. Hampi, Mahabalipuram, Varanasi, Kedarnath, they are all meld nicely into the environment. Unlike other faiths who build their places of worship in the center of a city as a source of power to demonstrate that the interlinking of the state and religion, whereas in our tradition, the temples are a source of melding with nature. Right now, it's a key aspect of how we see divinity as part of nature and a part of the environment we live in, right? So that is also why almost all our rituals, including Makar Sankranti and Pongal, are celebrated as a seasonal, related to the seasonal and celestial events. Like, for example, Makar Sankranti is 𝗤𝗡𝗏, where it's the winter solstice of days becoming longer and nights becoming shorter, right? So the looking forward to the spring. And this aspect of revering nature and environment that we live in is a key part of the Hindu faith system. And it doesn't consider man to be the top of the pyramid and everything else is created for him to rule over. Right? That has never been part of the Hindu ethos. And it's always considered that we are part of the sentient, we are part of the ecosystem like every other sentient being on the planet. And you can see that in our Itihasas and Puranas, as you can see the four statues from southern India: Hanuman, Garuda, Jadayu, and Jambavan, from the four states: Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu, showing how coexistence was a major part of our faith system. And as one of the things that happened after independence, when finally the British occupation of India for 90 odd years ended, our founders emphasized our duty to bring back the flora and fauna that has been retreating in India for almost 100 or 200 years. It's mainly because of the hunting being a glorified profession of the elites of England. You would have lords and the nobility who would go on to hunt large mammals across India. One thing that most people would have noticed is that in Europe, when you compare Europe and India as a landmass, there are very few large mammals left in Europe. They're all been driven to extinction. But we in India have always preserved both large herbivores like elephants and rhinos and large carnivores like the tigers and the lions and the leopards. And we're unique in that sense. And not only that, in the past 75 years, we've strived to increase the number of fauna compared to other similar heavily populated land masses like Africa or Latin America. We've done quite well in terms of not only preserving, but increasing the number of fauna in it. And that is a unique part of our culture. That is why our leaders, our prime ministers, they always show when they want to have photographs and when they meet media, they want to be seen as kind. Whereas if you look at other civilizations, you would see their leaders showing themselves as big hunters, and you would see these large country houses with hunted animals.
Heads of moose, heads of moose.
For example, we are only about 20 miles from a museum here called the Tring Museum. You go in there and you will see stuffed animals from all over the world, particularly from the Indian subcontinent, as a pride of saying, see, I've hunted down these great animals. But that has never been part of our ethos, right? So we take pride in preserving our flora and fauna and our biodiversity.
Go ahead.
So yes, agriculture has always been considered as an important profession. Both 𝗥𝗘𝗙𝗍 and then, of course, the Tamil text �திருக்குறள் glorifies agricultural labor and sustainable practices. And Pongal and Makar Sankranti predominantly deals with that particular aspect of our life, that agriculture, particularly a sustainable form of agriculture, is key to the human flourishing, right? Particularly millets and all these sort of ancient crops have now gone out of fashion, and the current government is trying to bring them back as a means to tackle water scarcity and seasonal impact that we have due to climate change, for example, right? So it is part of our faith system to think about nature and environmentalism as a spiritual exercise. So as you can see, India has a huge vegetarian tradition. It is interesting to note that in 10,000 years of human history, India is the only place on earth that developed a vegetarian tradition. No other civilization came even close. I believe that there was a short-lived French commune, a really small commune that tried it for a couple of decades and then vanished. Outside of that, there hasn't been a long-standing, predominantly vegetarian tradition anywhere else on the planet, right? And this came about mainly because of our monsoons and our ability to grow crops for a longer duration compared to other geographies, and also our philosophical framework of looking after every sentient being on planet and trying to minimize suffering as a general principle, right? Contrast this with West. In the last 50 to 60 years, I meet a lot of Europeans, Germans and Italians and Danes and Belgians and Brits saying that the only way they could remain as vegetarians is by switching to an Indian diet, right? Like Indian vegetarian diet is the only one that's sustainable, because if you look at the West approach to this, is that they fake meat with ultra-processed vegetarian alternatives, right? Like vegetarian sausages and vegetarian burgers, which are not going to be any more healthier than any organic meat, right? So you end up creating ultra-processed meat alternatives, which obviously are fake. And most people would not have noticed that just before the US presidential election, the Vice President-elect J.D. Vance went on Joe Rogan to talk about various aspects, and this topic about vegetarian diet came about. And Joe Rogan pointed out that if you want to stay as a vegetarian, eat a lot of Indian food, because Indian food is healthy. Indian food has been developed over the last 2,000 years to be more, attractive and delicious and varied, right? And J.D. Vance agreed and said that we should ditch fake meat. Fake meat is a major problem, and if people do really want to embrace a vegetarian lifestyle, the Indian vegetarian food is a good way to do it. And the current government's push towards millets also gives us this opportunity to have a sustainable solution for feeding large swathes of human population when we are looking at resource starvation due to various environmental factors, right? So to summarize, in this particular sort of harvest festival time, let's look at the 8 points that we looked at, right? Like the what are those that unites us all? Our civilizational identity. We are the people of the land of seven rivers, 𝗏 from which we get the name Hindu and India, the Sindhu Saraswati civilization. Our political and national identity is defined as Bharat, which is Himalayas in the north and the Indian Ocean in the south, and Sanatana Dharma as the moral and ethical framework of a civilization from north to south, which are well documented across two classical languages of the antiquities. We have 5,000 years of well-recorded history. We must learn those. We must learn about all of these if we can defend our faith system. And there are so many things that are unique about our civilization. The divine in the feminine form. We are the last major religion that does that. Coexisting with other species, not putting man. By that I explicitly mean the male of the species on the top of a pyramid. You can see that from the verses of other major faiths that it does identify man to be the top of the pyramid and everything else, including the female form, to be beneath him. And that our faith system doesn't do that. And large-scale sustainable vegetarian diet, and this is unique to us, and it minimizes suffering and the large-scale cruelty that you see in the West because of industrial farming and the sort of conditions animals are kept in. And accepting all modes of living, agrarian or pastoralist or tribal or urban, it doesn't matter. It's not that one group is superior to the other and you have to go and civilize and proselytize to others. We accepting all modes of life form or living as a part of our ecosystem, right? So at least we should be able to align ourselves on these 8 points and reflect on these during these touchstone events in the calendar.
Next one, please. Yeah.
𝗏 Makar Sankranti and 𝗍𝗏 Pongal 𝗦𝗘𝗙𝗥𝗙𝗏. So, and of course, to those who's celebrating 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗍 and happy 𝗿𝗚𝗏 as well.
Thank you so much. And this has been a wonderful presentation where we looked at the essence of Sanatana Dharma and the lifestyle and what it's sustainable about it, because it's sustained for thousands of years and it continues to do so. That's why it's called Sanatana Dharma, eternal flow. You know, Dharma has a lot of meanings. The one that I found more suitable here is 𝗟𝗜𝗡𝗞𝗦, one that flows. So that's how it's an eternal flow, and this will continue to enrich human beings on earth. And let's hope that, you know, this will survive for another 1,000 years or even more. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Namaskar.